FORA.tv. The world is thinking.
There is a story that you tell about the publisher who alleged that if Americans are going to read about Iranians, they're looking for stories of oppression and despair, not humor and joy. Do you encounter readers who think you should be more serious in your work?
Well, Funny in Farsi, when it came out in June of 2003, the negative comments I got were people who read the book and said, well, you know, you would think she would have talked about Islam and politics. Well, it's called Funny in Farsi. So, you know, if you're looking for Islam in depth, you might pick up a book called Islam in Depth. But I was really surprised that, you know, people would think because I'm an Iranian woman that my writing would automatically be about politics, automatically about Islam. And I still get this. And I think, you know, it is harder to make people laugh than it is to make them cry. So,
how have the media reacted to your books?
You know, it's been very interesting. Funny in Farsi sold 150,000 copies word of mouth. And I was, you know, it was reviewed when it came out, but the media really loves stories about Iran that are frightening. And Laughing Without an Accent, a month before it came out, I told my husband, I said, you know, I bet if Iran is in the news every single day, you know, about, you know, nuclear weapons and such, I bet I will only get like 2 reviews. And Laughing Without an Accent came out, and I had 0 reviews, and which is really surprising. I mean, you know, considering there's like, you know, there's 500,000 Iranians living in Los Angeles, you would think at least the LA Times would review it. And so I do think that even though, yes, we have free press in this country, but what it comes down to is there is, you know, an editor at the top of every newspaper who decides what stories are actually printed. And over again, I see that stories that have to do with Iran tend to be frightening. And I find that just so upsetting because, you know, there are people in this country who are seriously talking about invading Iran. Mm-hmm. Well, you know, if that's going to happen, then I think at least Americans should read everything they can about Iran. Because Ahmadinejad, our president, is not speaking on behalf of Iranian people, he's speaking on behalf of himself. And as much as David Duke represents Americans, you know, so.
Point well taken. What have you found most surprising or unexpected as you've done book tours and various presentations?
Well, I've traveled a good part of the past 5 years, speaking all over the United States, and I'm surprised, like when I go somewhere like rural Maine, how receptive they are to learning about Iran. You know, that, you know, there's this image of maybe, you know, smaller towns being closed-minded, but that has not all been my experience. In fact, I just got back from Bensenville, Illinois, where I'm pretty sure there are no Iranians whatsoever. And again, I mean, it was, you know, very curious audiences, lots of questions, and there, in every town I go to, there are a few people who are absolutely determined to make their citizens understand the concept of shared humanity. And they're usually the ones who invite me and who organize everything and, you know, who organize the Persian meal from recipes they have downloaded from the internet. So it's quite charming.
Your blog has some great stories. What are some of the ones that are particularly memorable for you?
Well, about 4 years ago, I got an email from a man in Tasmania. And he said that he had read Funny in Farsi and he loved it. And I emailed him back and I said, where did you find my book? In Tasmania. And he said, at the public library. Well, and he said that in their library they have a shelf for famous and important people. And that's where he'd found my book. So first of all, I do love Tasmania. And it's... Clearly, you know, it's a small island, and famous and important is a flexible term over there. But so I told him, I said, look, as soon as I write another book, I will send you a couple copies for your library. So a year ago, I get an email. Hello, this is Mike Bauer from Tasmania, reminding you to please send us your book. And so I said, okay, just give me the address of the library. And it was like Tasmania State Library, Tasmania, Australia. And so, and he said, but please make sure that you write that Mike Bauer gets to read these first, because there's going to be a waiting list. So I said, okay, Mike, why don't you give me your home address, and I will just send my books to your house. And so 2 weeks ago, I sent a box to Tasmania with copies of Laughing Without an Accent, but I also put books of actual famous and important people in there. So I put, Barack Obama's autobiography and Tom Brokaw's latest book, and I put Mark Salzman's Lost in Place, which is a memoir I really like. So we filled up this box, and a few days ago I got this email with lots of exclamation points, and it said, "Parcel has arrived." So somewhere in Tasmania, somebody is reading Laughing Without an Accent right now, I hope.